The Hebrew Bible is the most widely read piece of literature in human history. Known by Christians today as the Old Testament, this oracle covers thousands of years of history centered around a geographic region that we now know as Judea, or the modern state of Israel. For the past 3 summers, readers of this epic piece of literature have been gathering in the Shephelah region south of Jerusalem to engage with this book on a much deeper level. They are digging it up. The expedition is diverse, coming from 14 different nations and speaking more than 7 languages. The group includes computer programmers, military veterans, chemists, journalists, artists, nurses, and engineers, as well as students and archaeologists. On the surface, they are an unlikely alliance. But what binds them together is a quest to unearth the hidden secrets beneath the surface of the ancient biblical city of Lachish. Their search is an ancient one, beginning in the Iron Age and digging through layers, searching for the Bronze Age. It is in that timeline, from 1020 through 980 BC, that they hope to encounter evidence of the Hebrew Bible's most legendary monarchies, the reign and rule of the Davidic dynasty. Why here? Why now? Because Lachish is a treasure trove of ancient Middle Eastern history. It is an elevated ancient tell, layered with the remains of a city that was occupied by the Canaanites, the Egyptians, the Judeans, the Assyrians, and eventually even the Babylonians and the Persians. Layered within this elevated mound are the remnants of an Egyptian city gate, the cartouche of an ancient pharaoh, Baal shrines, an Assyrian siege ramp, and even a Judean palace. Lachish is the city that chronicles the struggle of ancient civilizations in the Levant like no other. Stories of the epic battles waged for control of this Judean outpost have been chronicled and recorded across civilizations. The earliest records of Lachish were recorded in Egypt during a period that predates the Israelite crossing of the Jordan. The Amarna letters are clay tablets from the 14th century BC that were first unearthed in Egypt during the late 1800s. This ancient correspondence reveals a powerful Canaanite city which is administered under the far-reaching rule of the Egyptian pharaohs.
You can see 2 main phases in the history of Lachish. First, it was in the 2nd millennium BC, it was a mighty Canaanite city-state. They built here one of the most impressive tales shape in Israel, with massive foundations and massive stones all over the site. And this city is also mentioned in Egypt, in the Amarna tablet. 6 letters were sent by the king of Lachish to the pharaoh in Egypt. The end of this city is not so clear, but the biblical tradition describes how Joshua and the people of Israel came and destroyed Lachish in the second day. And I'm always asking myself, what's happened in the first day?
The first biblical character that came to Lachish, according to the biblical tradition, was Joshua and the Israelites. The Lachish is mentioned 24 times in the Old Testament, and the first time it's mentioned in Joshua. And the famous story where a whole coalition of kings, which included the king of Lachish as well, went against the Israelites, and they heard of their coming in the conquest across from Jordan. They had heard about Jericho. They had heard about some of these things, and they said, we're gonna defeat this people. And they came up against Lachish. And you may have heard the story of the day the sun stood still as that battle raged on between the Israelites who were coming into the land and this coalition of kings. But eventually, the Bible tells us God's armies were victorious, and God also provided supernatural means for that to happen, and the king of Lachish was eventually killed together with the other kings. That's the first time Lachish is mentioned in the Bible.
And the Lord delivered Lachish into the hand of Israel, which it took on the second day, and smote it with the edge of the sword, and all the souls that were therein. Joshua 10:32.
Then this place was deserted for about 200 or 300 years. And the second big chapter in the history of Lachish is in the time of the kings of Judah, when Lachish was the second most important city in Judah after Jerusalem. So like today we have Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, in antiquity you have Jerusalem and Lachish.
A city conquered by Joshua, located only 42 kilometers southwest of Jerusalem, and heavily fortified. It is inevitable that Lachish would eventually find a role in the powerful Israelite and Judean kingdoms. The mystery lies with the question of when. When did Lachish become an active city in the Israelite United Monarchy and the eventual Judean kingdom? Was it a bustling part of the kingdom of David? Did it remain undeveloped until the expansion of Solomon? Or was Rehoboam the one who built Lachish into the city that anchored the southern border of the new Judean monarchy after the revolt of the northern kingdom? Facing a looming threat approaching from the south, the Hebrew Bible tells us Solomon's son, Rehoboam, traveled to Lachish to fortify Judah against an ancient foe.
One of the individuals mentioned specifically in the book of Chronicles is Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, who, according to the Bible, refortified a number of the cities of Judah in preparation for Shishak, the king of Egypt's campaign to this particular region. And he refortifies Lachish, he refortifies a whole number of cities that guard the highways leading up to Jerusalem in the Central Hill Country. So we know about that event. That takes us back to the 10th century BC.
Now a fortified bastion, Lachish becomes the home of the winter palace of the Judean monarchs. A city second in power and prestige only to Jerusalem. But in the midst of Lachish's glory, political turmoil in Jerusalem boils over. And suddenly, Lachish finds itself embroiled in the assassination of a Judean king.
If we move forward from there, we also know of Amaziah, the king of Judah, who, after defeating the Edomites, becomes very proud and decides to take on the northern kingdom of Israel. So he goes up to the northern kingdom of Israel, he challenges the king of the northern kingdom, and he says, basically, let's meet one another, let's have battle. The king says, why would you want to do that? Why don't you relish your victory over Edom and not come up here? But Amaziah goes against him anyway. The Judean armies are completely defeated, and the king of Israel comes down and actually tears down large sections of the walls of Jerusalem. And with time, I think that is probably the beginning of Amaziah's lack of support from his own people in Judah. And eventually, the Bible says, this led to a coup attempt on Amaziah's life, and he flees to Lachish for refuge, but he is killed here at Lachish, taken back to Jerusalem, and that is where he is buried among the other kings of Judah.
The fortunes of Judah continued to thrive in the First Temple period, and so would the palatial city of Lachish. Life was good in the Levant. Good until antiquity took another turn toward conquest and destruction. As the 9th century BC unfolded into the 8th century, ancient power struggles turned the Levant into a global battleground. Destruction and deportation were the rules, as the most powerful empires in the ancient world expanded their horizons. Suddenly, in 722 BC, the northern kingdom fell to the Assyrians. The Israelites were force-marched to Assyria, and Israel was no more. Judah was spared the Israelites' fate, but only for a few decades. In 701 BC, King Sennacherib of Assyria conquered all the fortified cities of Judah, including Lachish. He burned the city, killed most of its citizens, and marched the remnant of survivors back to the land of Nineveh.
In the year 701 BC, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, the largest empire in the world at the time, came and conquered Lachish. This was a very traumatic event. It's mentioned in 3 different biblical books, in the book of Kings, in the book of Isaiah, and in Chronicles. Then we also have Assyrian document describing Sennacherib's campaign to Judah. And then we have a beautiful relief, 20 meters long, at the British Museum, describing the city and the siege.
For centuries, the Hebrew Bible contained the only record of the fall of Lachish. It was our only source until 1845, when Austen Henry Layard, a British explorer, discovered the lost city of Nineveh. It was within Sennacherib's palace without rival that he unearthed one of the most detailed archaeological depictions of a battle ever discovered. The alabaster reliefs covered a room 12 meters wide by 10 meters long and bore an inscription that read,
Sennacherib, the mighty king, king of the country of Assyria, sitting on the throne of judgment before the city of Lachish. I give permission for its slaughter.
Commenting on the inscription above the seated figure of Sennacherib, Layard wrote,
Here was the actual picture of the taking of Lachish, the city, as we know from the Bible, besieged by Sennacherib, when he sent his generals to demand tribute of Hezekiah. This highly interesting series of bas-reliefs contained an undoubted representation of an event described in Holy Writ.
Biblical archaeology has also greatly illuminated events of the Bible. In some cases, those events are a little bit more ephemeral to nail down, but particularly here at Lachish. One of the fabulous events that we're excavating right now in level 3 is the massive destruction of Sennacherib, which is illuminated in a very multifaceted way through archaeology. First of all, by the reliefs at Nineveh that we have found way back in the 1800s, by Layard, and which are now in the British Museum, which show the attack against this city in a number of panels in the focal point of Sennacherib's palace. Also in Sennacherib's written documents, his annals, and the archaeological evidence here at the site itself through the last 4 expeditions that have taken place here. And finally, in the Bible, where this story is one of the most detailed stories retold in Isaiah, in Kings and Chronicles. So all of those things together have really illuminated an event in biblical history in a multifaceted way, in a 3-dimensional way that makes it very real to us today.
With the reliefs and other records found in the Nineveh excavation, as well as the discoveries in Egypt soon after, things suddenly looked quite different. Lachish's status went from being an unknown site with little documentation to a city whose history was documented across 3 civilizations.
The case of Lachish is very rare because you don't have in any other example from the ancient Near East where you have the account of the attacker, the account of the people who were attacked, a pictorial picture, and the site itself. We have 4 different resources, all of them telling us about this year, 701 at Lachish.
Once the Assyrian stone reliefs became known, the archaeological significance of the site of the battle greatly increased. Lachish was now a biblical city that must be found. British archaeologists had investigated other locations, but in 1929, an elevated mound located between the city of Hebron and the Mediterranean Sea was proposed by William Foxwell Albright, an American archaeologist, as the home of the ancient biblical city of Lachish. The records of the 4th century Christian bishop of Caesarea, Eusebius, note that Lachish was located on a Roman road that was discovered to have run from Damascus through Jerusalem to Gaza and on to Egypt. The writings of St. Jerome recall a pilgrimage in 385 AD, where Lachish was mentioned as being on the main road to Egypt. The discovery of a section of this ancient Roman road was uncovered by a British expedition just northwest of the mound Albright had proposed. This confirmed clues left in the records of Eusebius and Jerome in the 4th century. No other site in the area contained the archaeological remains of a heavily damaged fortified city from the time of the Judean kingdom. When analyzed together, these facts left no other possible location that could agree with all the ancient records. The only way to know was to dig. In 1932, an archaeologist from London was looking for an opportunity to form an expedition and lead his first independent excavation. James Leslie Starkey chose a tell at the edge of the Shephelah Hills, popularly known as Tel Ed Duer, which Albright had asserted was ancient Lachish. The 4 seasons of excavations led by Starkey produced an amazing discovery that has greatly illuminated the final days of the biblical kingdom of Judah. Jerusalem had been spared the ravages of the Assyrians that devastated Lachish in 701, and Assyrian power in the Levant began to fade. The waning days of their decline left a window for Judah to refortify and rebuild the southern fortress cities of Lachish and Azekah. The 6th century BC marked the final days of the First Temple period in biblical history. Instead of peace, the fall of the Assyrian Empire merely opened a new chapter of warfare and tribute in the southern Levant. The Assyrians' loss became the Babylonians' gain. As the new power broker in the Middle East, King Nebuchadnezzar demanded tribute from every state in the region, and Judah was no exception. As strong monarchs were replaced, Judah found itself under the yoke of Babylonian tribute with a vassal king, subservient to Nebuchadnezzar in every way. Coerced by the priests and politicians of Jerusalem to rebel against Chaldean oppression, King Zedekiah made Judah's final fateful decision. The Judean rebellion brought the punitive wrath of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian army, not only on Jerusalem, but the entire kingdom. With Jerusalem encircled, once again, Lachish found itself cut off from the Judean capital in a time of war. These were the days recorded in the words of Jeremiah the prophet. Then Jeremiah the prophet spoke all these words to Zedekiah, king of Judah in Jerusalem, when the army of the king of Babylon was fighting against Jerusalem and against all the remaining cities of Judah, that is, Lachish and Azekah, for they alone remained as fortress cities among the cities of Judah. Jeremiah 34, 6-7. Barely 100 years after Sennacherib had destroyed the city, Lachish was attacked and destroyed by Babylonian forces in 587 through 586 BC. Once again, the Bible held the only record of the fall of these Judean outposts and the kingdom of Judah. The only record until the first expedition to Lachish.
In the year 1935, the first expedition to Lachish, headed by James Leslie Starkey, excavated this gate area, and here in this room they found about 20 letters. The letters were written with ink on pottery sherds.
The Lachish letters were written during the final days of the Judean army and were found among the burnt debris on the floor of a guard room near the outer city wall. These messages, from a commander located in a post somewhere near the fortified cities of Lachish and Azekah, contain reports to his superior officer inside Lachish. The most famous among them is Lachish letter number 4.
And let my lord know that we are watching for the fire signals of Lachish, according to all indications which my lord has given. For we cannot see, Azekah.
As the wrath of Nebuchadnezzar's army swept across the country, a distraught commander reported to his superior that the great city of Azekah had fallen, and he was waiting for some signal of hope from Lachish. This was likely the last message that made it through to the guard room inside the city. Shortly, Lachish too would fall and be consumed by flames. Another letter, among the many ostraca found on the guardroom floor, speaks of a prophet who is not named. Some believe the unidentified prophet in the Lachish letters to be Jeremiah. These letters, written in classical Hebrew on earthen pottery, are among the few surviving documents from the First Temple period. Now, more than 80 years after their discovery, these letters remain the most important corpus of written documents from the biblical period that have been discovered in Israel. Containing over 100 lines of text, the letters not only confirm the identity of the archaeological site of Lachish, but they also indicate that the citizens of this region were highly literate, and the biblical Hebrew language used in the book of Jeremiah was commonly in use in the late days of the Kingdom of Judah. The discoveries of the Lachish relief, as well as the Lachish letters, have helped to draw worldwide attention to the archaeological excavation of biblical sites.
You know, when we're looking at the biblical stories, there's a lot of traditions, a lot of stories that we know only from the stories told in the Bible. And in Lachish, I think it's the first time that we have the biblical stories and the actual archaeological finds speaking more or less in the same language. I mean, we're talking about a period of 2,800 years ago, the days of Chizkiah, the Assyrian siege. It's described on the walls of the palace in Nineveh, in Iraq of today. And you come over here, read the biblical story about the siege, about the city, the way it's described over there, and you actually find here in the site the same story. So we're taking the stories of the Bible, and this is the first time that they're actually found in real over here. And again, it's an open window to the past here, telling us the stories of the Bible are true. This is where they happened.
As a result of the excavations at biblical sites, such as Lachish, the science of biblical archaeology has emerged as the focal point of extensive research. Today, students and volunteers from all over the world travel to Israel to be a part of seeking the answers that lie buried beneath the surface of the biblical Holy Land.
Biblical archaeology is basically the archaeology of the land of Israel in the Canaanite period and the Israelite period. These are the periods that are described in the Bible on the one hand, and then we have archaeological sites from the same period and the same area. And biblical archaeology combining the biblical text on the one hand and the archaeology on the other. In the beginning, the first scholars that just started to do archaeology, they knew very little about archaeology, but they have a huge data from the Bible. So the Bible was the most important source and archaeology was secondary. After 100 years, we have more and more and more and more archaeological data, and the biblical text remained the same. So in the past, archaeology was in the shade of the Bible. Today, in a way, the Bible is in the shade of archaeology. From the archaeological data, we learn a lot of interesting things about the biblical tradition. Many things that describe in the Bible just in one sentence or in few words, suddenly in archaeology became a big story. The biblical text by its nature is very condensed. These are traditions that were kept for hundreds and thousands of years. And from generation to generation, sometimes they have been edited a bit or have been changed a bit. Archaeology giving us authentic data from the times that these things happened.
There aren't many places, there are no places in the world that you can take the Tanakh, the Bible, and use it as your guiding book. That's, I think, the most basic thing here. You walk around with the Bible and you read the stories, you see the background, you see the area where it was written. It didn't come with a GPS, the Bible, so we're using tradition to put the places together, to understand the name that was kept in the same site might be the place. And now what we're doing in the archaeology is we're actually looking to see if that works, if we do find those places that are mentioned in the Tanakh, if the stories actually happen the same, how do they correlate, the Bible and the land and the archaeology? Taking people around here again. If you've been reading this book in any other place in the world, it's an interesting book. If you read it over here, you can see the painting around it. You can see the area where it was written in.
Those volunteering with the 4th expedition to Lachish are seeking not only to learn about the process of biblical archaeology, but they intend to become an active part of it. They've come to dig. Traveling thousands of miles from other continents, each person is seeking something unique and personal. The best way to know them is to hear their voices.
Real people were living in this city, and it's amazing to think about. The pottery I find, someone was using it at some point. You have all these different stories weaving together, coming all the way to today.
Well, my friend called me. He said this year they're excavating in Lachish, and Lachish is the second an important city from the days of the first temple. And I work in guiding people around the country, so being in the place where, of course, the stories go to, this is, it's Lachish. it's like the second most important city in Judea from the days of the first temple. How can you not want to be part of that?
I think it's kind of fun just to play in the dirt. It kind of feels like you're a kid again and just digging in. But also it's amazing when you actually find something and you like touch it and you're like, the last person to touch this was 200 years ago. That's amazing. It's crazy.
Participating in this has completely changed the way I teach and the way I even read the Bible. When I read it, I gain more insights, and I can in turn pass that on in classes and lessons and sermons. And so it's really impacted the entire church where I am. And things that I didn't know before or didn't really understand before, everyone in the congregation understands it now because of the benefits of me being here.
You know, we have dust underneath our nails. We're moving dust that hasn't been moved in the last 2,800 years. I don't know what I'll find. We're looking for something. We're looking to find the rest of the stories. We're looking to find... It's a surprise. That's what I'm looking for.
You know, we do a lot of things where we talk about the Bible, where we have all these ideas about it, and there's something very cool about doing tangible things that are related to the Bible, where you can actually put your hands in and come up with a destruction level that's talked about in the Bible. It's just the coolest feeling ever. And it definitely enhances my faith. I wouldn't say my faith is contingent upon it, but it illuminates my faith so that it really helps me be able to, I think, explain it better to others, make it more real for other people, and all that good stuff.
Archaeology majors are few among the students who come to excavate. The person digging in the next square is often majoring in communications, theology, political science, the arts, or medicine. The diversity among these students is broad, but their educational level and preparation is high. Each one arrives excited and committed to engaging in the archaeological process.
Oh, the finds. No, it's exciting. I had no idea. In Israel, you find ceramic shards almost right away, so you're always finding something. And even when you find rocks, they can be really significant. So in the square that I'm working in, we happen to be finding a lot of architectural structures, and what at first seemed like rocks suddenly are walls.
An opening, we're right between an opening, which they believe is from the Hellenistic period. And then below us is a massive wall. And part of the research question is to identify what period this wall is from. So like who built it and when was it destroyed. So between the opening, we've just been excavating level by level, and we got down here. So we're right up against the wall. And we found some hand burnished pottery sherds. Not a ton, but enough to say that this could be level 5 or could be Iron Age. So it could help with dating this wall. So our hope is that this may be Iron Age.
In addition to excavating Lachish, volunteers from the 4th expedition head out and explore the Holy Land. Their time in Israel includes exploring other biblical archaeological sites, such as Khirbet Qeiyafa, where the Israelites battled the Philistines, the fortress city of Azekah, as well as Jerusalem, the Galilee, and the ancient Philistine city of Ashkelon. Their labor advances biblical archaeology in many ways, including documenting the presence of many biblical figures.
The final area where archaeology, biblical archaeology, can really make a tremendous difference is in the illumination of the people of the Bible. Many times I get questions, well, what about David? What about Solomon? What about so-and-so? Do we have evidence for these heroes of the Bible that we read so much about? And sometimes skeptical scholars will say, well, we don't have any evidence of Moses out there, or we don't have any evidence of Joshua particularly. And we can look at the cup half empty or half full. We can say, well, we haven't found evidence of these individuals in the archaeological record. I'd like to look at the cup half full and say, there's over 100 individuals in the Bible, not only emperors and kings, but also scribes and minor palace officials that we have discovered through archaeology. And those men and women of the Bible that have been discovered either on seal impressions or on monumental inscriptions really have revealed a great deal, not only about their existence, but about the context in which they lived in these places that we excavate from year to year.
Okay.
The work of the volunteers of the 4th expedition builds on the legacy of the Lachish letters and previous expeditions. Together, these excavations establish Lachish as one of the most important sites in biblical archaeology. No known archaeological evidence of Solomon's son, King Rehoboam, existed prior to the 4th expedition. Chronicles records the cities fortified by David's grandson, and prominent among them was the city of Lachish. During the 2015 season, Dr. Hugu Kang led a team of volunteers from Virginia Commonwealth University and Jiangxin University in unearthing 3 previously discovered stone and mud brick defensive walls, which were recorded in the Hebrew Bible. As his volunteers dug deeper, a 4th, previously unknown city wall emerged from the side of this ancient tell. Suspense and excitement grew. Would this wall provide evidence of the Davidic dynasty? As they continued to excavate over the next 2 seasons, the answer emerged. Radiocarbon dating confirmed the city wall they unearthed, and the community the volunteers discovered behind it dated to approximately 920 BC, the time of Rehoboam, the first monarch of the newly formed Kingdom of Judah. These volunteers experienced a truly defining event in the archaeology of the Bible. Digging on the side of the Tell, they were able to view the excavated city walls that surrounded the events of 600 years of epic biblical history. From the formation of the Kingdom of Judah through the close of the Hebrew Bible and the conquest of Alexander the Great, they are associated with Nehemiah, Jeremiah, Hezekiah, and Amaziah, as well as David's grandson, Rehoboam. These same standing walls have survived the conquest of Alexander the Great, the Babylonian destruction, the Assyrian destruction by Sennacherib, and the Egyptian invasion of King Shishak. The sweat and determination of these volunteers has expanded the epic biblical story that is Lachish.
The end of Lachish, as we know from the archaeological finds here and the biblical stories, is the end of the story of the first temple. We're talking about a Babylonian campaign down to Judah, the exile of Judah, destruction of the first temple, and that's a story that more or less ends the glorious days of the first temple period of the Judean kingdom over here 2,600 years ago. And what it means, you just look around, you see the views over here. There's modern Lachish just around the corner. The names that continue, the people who came back to their land 2,600 years later, and are actually finding their past, finding their history, our story, finding it here in the ground. What it means, the Jews coming back to Judea, that's what it is.
The story of prophets and prophecies fulfilled continues at Lachish even to this day. An ancient biblical city Jeremiah prophesied to fall stands beside a modern community prophesied to return and plant vineyards in the land of Israel.